And the first order of business is the hearing of public comment. Just looking to see if any hands are raised. I don't see any hands raised. So we'll move on to correspondence. I was approached by a member of the public to see if the school committee wished to go on record in support or not of the fair share amendment. Whether we feel that's even a topic that we want to discuss. Fair shares amendment is a amendment that people with incomes above $1 million will pay additional income tax. And I wasn't sure whether that would be a topic that we want to discuss, but we don't have to make a decision now. I just wanted to let you know that I was approached on that. We can discuss later whether we think that's a topic that we would like to address. Moving on, I'm going to go to the board report, which is the school committee meeting minutes of February 28th. Somebody would like to.
I'll work to approve those minutes.
I'll second that.
Discussion. None. We'll vote, all in favor?
I think there was an abstention. There's a
One abstention. Just trying to check it here. Okay, and the next thing was the superintendent evaluation process, and we sent you a copy of the evaluation form that we use, and I'm just opening a copy of it now. A few of us attended. Did you attend that? And did you?
I was there at the beginning and had to jump off, but I saw that it was being recorded, so I'll probably go back.
At least 4 of us, maybe more, attended the MASC evaluation webinar the other day, and it was actually very informative. We used this form that they were talking about, and if you have it either printed or if you have it in front of you, I just want to talk about the process a little bit. The superintendent has established certain goals that are listed, in the document, and so one thing we do is we evaluate. He does a self-evaluation, and we do an evaluation of each of the goals that he has. Then there are 4 standards: instructional leadership, management and operations, family and community, and professional culture. And we've always tried to address all of these. And what the recommendation was at the webinar was that we pick, maybe a subcommittee here picks the relevant one. We have to evaluate all 4 standards. That's a given. But that within each standard, there are 4 to 6 indicators, and that we may choose which ones we feel are relevant to the superintendent's goals. And so that we don't, and then we pick those, and then we say to the membership here that these are the ones that we're going to rate. And that was one of the things we've always done, all of them. And people come up and say, "Gee, I don't know how I can do that. I have no clue on that." Where we would potentially have a better clue on ones that relate to the superintendent's goals, when he's given us some feedback on his goals and stuff. So that was one thing. But again, going into the process a little bit, once we've decided what we're going to evaluate on, and this will be the first time actually that we've done it this way with this feedback from MASC on the whole process. What I've done is printed the form, sent it out to everybody electronically, and had people fill in the boxes, the ratings from did not meet all the way up to exceed on the goals, and then on the each of the standards, unsatisfactory, needs improvement, proficient, or exemplary. And it all comes back to me, and I compile it. You can also put narrative comments. And what I've done in the past is I've taken all the narrative comments and I've just copied them into kind of the master document that they will then become the evaluation form that I'll talk with Mark about, and we'll approve at some point here. And so that's been the process, and about 60 to 70% of the people on the webinar indicated that that's how they did it. The stuff was submitted to the chairman and the chairman compiled it and it did it. Some other groups had a subcommittee kind of review everything and then write the final summary. I'm kind of inclined to do it the way we've always been doing it, but again, this is just informative tonight. We can decide what we want to do later. And I indicate if we have, for example, 5 people who said proficient and 2 who said exemplary and 1 needs improvement, I indicate in the little boxes, 5 here, 1 here, and 1 here, so that we know. And then ultimately, on each area, at the bottom of each of the standards, you have a rate unsatisfactory, needs improvement, proficient, or exemplary, and you kind of look at kind of where the numbers are falling, and I take the number that most accurately reflects what people have said. I don't know if anybody who was on the webinar wants to talk about any other aspects of it.
I think you hit the.
Yeah, I mean,
It was really the big thing to me was that we don't have to be, hitting each of those indicators under. We do have to rate each of the standards, but we don't have to necessarily get every single indicator under there. And the subcommittee of the school committee, perhaps the governance and leadership one, schedule one, for the purpose of kind of aligning the indicators with the goals and seeing which ones we want to assess.
I remember them saying that the webinar would be posted
Yeah.
on the MASC site, so it's actually, you're going back.
Yeah, it was about an hour, and it was a pretty good hour of information, a lot of good questions. So anyway, I don't know if anybody has any questions.
I think one of the things, 2 things. One is I think that feedback around not trying to just maybe give minimal feedback on something that doesn't fit the goals is really great. And also with the idea of using this tool to really refine and articulate goals for next year, because I do think the tendency to come kind of just throw everything in. And in a year like this, especially where there's been so much shifting and so many things in a number of years without, well, everybody's been kind of keeping homeostasis or trying to stay ahead of the COVID issues, the more district related long range issues, it's also been like, well, let's just do it all. And I really do think that it's incumbent upon us to really kind of hone in and articulate the priority. And some, of course, certain things we've always said that you got to have a budget. There's certain things that are just inherent and baked into the job. And then there's sort of, what are we seeing for the future? How do we articulate that and help prioritize how time is best spent? And then how are we, guiding, having Mark and us work in partnership to get there.
Exactly that, yeah, I think that
And I think that that narrowing is really important. I didn't experience that in the past, and I think in the past when I've done this, the instruments were pretty similar. I think this was maybe new at that time when I first started using it, because it was mirrored a lot of the way that teaching evaluations and administrative evaluations. So there's something sort of similar in all of them in the way they go forward. But I think it would be good for us to exercise that as well, in honing in on what's important and how do we bring that forward, because that's really the main purpose of an evaluation is how do we want to carry it forward. And I'd like the idea, if you'd be okay with it, of us doing it with a small committee collaboratively, and wondering whether, Megan and you and I are quote unquote the officers or whatever, if maybe, and I'm not going to volunteer, I probably told Megan, but I'm thinking it would be good to have a little bit more opportunity to have that input as to how we get consensus around refining that, if you're willing to do that. And I just was thinking sometimes it's easy to sort of think, all right, chair, vice chair, secretary, or some way but I don't, we could do it any other way, but I would like to just think if I could, because I think, we come out of different perspectives.
Yeah, no, that'd be good. That'd be good. So if the committee has no problem, then, Megan, Veronica and I can figure out a time to sit and look at the document and see which of the indicators and go from there. Typically, I try to get this document out to people in early May with the idea of having it back in time. So ideally, we can do the evaluation at the June, we can have the final evaluation ready for the June meeting. So that's kind of my goal.
I think that sounds great. Another aspect, which I think is related to Ronnie's comments that I took away from the meeting was, I really liked the integration, which was described by the superintendent, who was one of the speakers, of the goals into the course of the year. And so I think he provided some links, I clicked on them, and even in the agendas for the school committee meetings, they would note how each agenda point on the agenda was like tied to a goal. So there's this nice through line, and you're always in every meeting being reminded and drawn back to, like, here's sort of how this is all framed, which I thought was nice. It's a nice reminder of what the overall goals are, and how we're kind of keeping focus on them throughout. So there may be that may be an idea, and there may be some other things that we could help tie in, and that might be material that we could talk about in the next governance and leadership committee meeting before the end of the year.
Okay, that's all I have. Did anybody else have any? That's all I have for the board report. So now we'll move on to.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we have a number of highlights and commendations. Start tonight first with the commendations. I'm happy to report that we have 5 national merit finalists from LMHS. David Bain, Mary Elliott, Julianne Harwood, Benjamin Heim, and Fiona Matthews. So congratulations to those students and being honored for their ongoing academic work and also their high test scores on the PSAT. And it's a significant honor to be named the National Merit Finalist, and best wishes to those. Hopefully they'll be in a contention for the scholarships.
Quick
Scholarship.
Darby Bain.
Oh, is it Darby Bain?
Yeah.
Sorry, the name is not correct. Darby Bain, thank you.
That's good, because I was kind of like.
And then we also have another round of John and Abigail Adams Scholarship Award recipients to announce. So earlier this year, we shared 10 names of folks who qualified for that scholarship, and we have 13 new names: Brandon Bard, Carolina Chassie, James Dalton, Hallie Davies, Chloe Doyle, Madison Hines, Michaela King, Otto Meismer, Cameron Odell, Bailey Rogers, Elise Schelling, Luca Traversa, and Lento Vargas. And the John and Abigail Adams Scholarship Award allows any student who receives this award 8 semesters at a Massachusetts State College or University tuition free. So it's a significant award, and that brings us to 23 total students this year who've been offered that award. So
These are current seniors.
yes. So quite proud of them, and again, a significant year for this class. And then on to some highlights. So lots going on around the district. One of the things I want to share with the community is that the International Fair is happening again. It'll be this Wednesday, March 23rd. And although the activities will mainly take place that evening from 5:30 to 8:30, I'd also like to share that the organizers of the event have also been able to secure salsa, Latin, and Irish dance classes for adults and students during and after school. Additionally, the Berkshire Bateria Brazilian Percussion Ensemble will host a participatory workshop at the fair, followed by performance in the Duffin Theater. We're very fortunate to bring all these artists together at LMHS. And while certainly everyone's schedules are filling up at this time of year, we hope that folks will be able to come out and join us on Wednesday. The LMHS cafeteria will also be transformed into an exhibit hall that will represent several countries from around the world. Again, we want to extend a thank you to everyone who planned their exhibits or shared a travel experience or a project. And there's still time if anyone wants to put together an idea for the exhibit that's still available. So please mark your calendars, plan to attend the event. Again, that date is Wednesday, March 23rd from 5:30 to 8:30 p.m. And I want to just say a special thank you to Anne Marie Rodriguez for her effort and energy planning this event. Really excited to see this come back. It's one of these things I've heard so much about, and so I'm really excited to see that's making a comeback. Secondly, today, I had an opportunity to join a unique event over at LMMHS that was, again, kind of a student organized event. They called it the Ukraine panel, and I'd seen these posters around the school, and I was a little curious, so I leaned in and asked more about it, and I was told that the students were curious about trying to understand some of the unrest and war that's going on in Ukraine. And so they reached out to the history department who offered to provide a discussion for the students. It was excellent. They started with a historical look back at the Ukraine from almost BC on forward. And it was really interesting to trace the history of Ukraine. And I think the kids had just to really understand some of the larger historical context, viewpoints, being able to see multiple sides and lenses on the conflict that maybe wouldn't have been readily discernible had they not had that history lesson beforehand. And then it opened up into a question and answer session, and the questions that the students posed were fantastic. And I think it was a great chance to come together and collectively construct meaning around this, ask questions, get answers, be able to make the connections. I think it was really done in a fantastic way too, where it gave multiple perspectives on the issue. I think that that's something that maybe doesn't always come across in the way that the issue is portrayed to us. And so it's easy to look at this through a very US centric lens and fail to understand what the world the other side is thinking. I think that the historical context helped to paint more of that picture. So it's a great event for the students today. And again, thanks to our history department for putting it together on relatively short notice, but also going above and beyond to do something that was student driven and really an area of interest.
Was that all 4 grades?
For the kids? Yeah. Actually, I mean, it was for all elementary.
All elementary.
Yeah.
So was it did they do it in the Duffy or how did
They did it in the library. And so they set up chairs, they had a table in the front, and the history department served as panelists. And they took turns giving the presentation at the beginning. Their presentation probably could have filled up hours, and so they cut through some of it to make sure they had enough space for student questions. But it was excellent. I went over, Amy also joined me, and it was a nice time for the kids today.
That's great.
Also, last week, we had the National Honors and National Art Honors Society's induction ceremonies. So again, congratulations to all the students who were inducted. It was great, again, to be able to come together in person in the Duffin and have that experience. It's one of my favorites because, again, it's a student organized event. And so the students play a major role in that. The advisors basically say hi and bye, but everything else is the kids. They, they write the speech, they read the information, they conduct the ceremony. And while they're a national frameworks, there's a little bit of opportunity for you to use some local flair too. So they did a nice job. It was a great event.
Are those juniors now mostly, or are those juniors and seniors who are
So it's
inducted?
juniors that are inducted, rising seniors.
Yeah.
And I think they also honored the seniors who were inducted last year as well, because they had a unique circumstance because of COVID. They didn't have the opportunity to have a normal ceremony. This week at LMHS, it's Spirit Week. So we have Spirit Week back in the fall, winter, and here's the kind of winter, spring edition of Spirit Week. And Monday, today, it was a beach theme. Tomorrow is neon. So again, we get to break out our 80s clothes if you still have them hanging around and bring back the neon. Wednesday is pajama day. Thursday is St. Patrick's Day, and they're trying to encourage students to wear green. And then Friday is a day to support Ukraine, and they're asking students to wear blue and yellow. And then Friday afternoon, there'll be a pep rally. And so I'm excited to go over it and see that. The last kind of spirit rally they have. It's a fantastic time right before the winter break for the kids to come together. So I think these are, to me, positive signs that school is kind of regaining its stride, coming back to normal, and doing some of the things that, you know, make school so fun and memorable for kids. And so I think an infusion of joy, is something I'm really excited to see. Even around the high school, you see a whole proliferation, sorry, of posters hanging on the walls that I didn't see just a few weeks ago. So things are starting to reignite, kids are starting to re-engage. Some of the things that were lost during COVID, I think, are starting to reemerge. You know, so there's a poster for a jam band, you know, there's a poster for a game playing club for kids to come together if they're interested in playing games. So it's just interesting, and I think it's exciting to see that these things are starting to reemerge, and that you know, everybody's being able to once again get together with friends and indulge in interests and reinvigorate and reinvest in those friendships and relationships. So that's something that I'm particularly struck at just walking around the school in the last couple of weeks, is this, you know, reemergence of student activities and clubs. Also last week, we had Career Day, and I want to thank Amy Noble-Levitsky for playing a major role in the organization of that event. The cafeteria was just about packed to the gills. We had different businesses and different types of careers represented at a variety of tables throughout the cafeteria. Christine Morrow was there representing not the school committee, but medical professions. And we had everybody from Smitty, who was there, talking about what it's like to be a state level politician. We had medical community members, we had pilots, we had folks from engineering fields, we had folks from restaurants, we had a hairstylist, a couple of banks represented. So military was there, we had police, fire, yeah, we had a judge. So we had quite a cross section of opportunities for kids to learn, and there were multiple opportunities to kind of switch and visit new tables every so often. So again, great conversations, lots of interest, and that was for our 8th graders, and so they had a chance to really start to wrap their mind around what some of the potential career opportunities might be post high school, post college.
Did you do a booth for school administrators?
I didn't, and I thought about that a lot. I said, maybe we should do that next year, you know?
Had an elementary teacher.
Yes, we did have an elementary teacher, because we need people in our career as well, so that is a very good suggestion.
I'd like to give a shout out and a thank you to everyone who did participate and volunteered their time to come and talk to our students.
That's a great morning.
Well, thank you, Amy, for helping coordinate this, because I know in past years, there's what, 40 or 50 different people coming to it?
The most we've ever had like is about 30, 35.
That's
Yeah.
organizing a lot of people.
It's still a yeoman's task, she did an amazing job. And again, that's one of those, another signal, I think, to me, that school is getting back to normal, we're able to come together and enjoy those types of events. Just a reminder that spring sports are also ramping up. Signups were last week. This week is getting all the paperwork together, coaches meetings. Sports being offered this spring are baseball, softball, boys and girls track, boys and girls tennis, crew, boys lacrosse, which is a cooperative team that we're hosting this year for the first time at Lenox, and girls lacrosse, which is being hosted cooperatively by so excited again to get back out there on the track and the fields and get back to playing sports. And
we have all our coaches and everything.
we have all of our coaches looking to go. And I did want to share with the committee that recently all of the superintendents across the state were asked to share some of their budget realities because our association, the Massachusetts Association of School Superintendents, is working with legislators on a revision to the state budget. Legislators have indicated that they're interested in talking about raising the current cap of 4.5% to 5.9% in order to more accurately represent the cost of run-ups that schools have seen, largely due to inflation and other COVID-related spending. So they're sensitive to that, and I think while we'll probably not see a major increase in our budget here locally. I think that it still matters that we're seeing at least a willingness of the legislature to embrace and understand the fact that costs have risen across the state and that they're being responsive to that. So we shared some of the specific cost areas that we saw run ups. They asked us for very specific line items, you know, what those rates of increase were. Also last week, I had an opportunity to meet with Chuck Leach, the president of Lee Bank. Lee Bank is really interested in expanding their partnership with the school district. They did participate in the career event. They'd also be interested in participating potentially in the Pathways program. Also, they're very interested in reaching out to anyone who would like summer employment. They're experiencing some difficulties filling some of their cashier or I don't know what they call it, the people, teller positions. And so they're looking for some of that help in kind of the front of the house of the bank. I think it's a great opportunity for kids to come in and get some real world work experience. And some stay on and end up having great careers in banking, and then others go off to college or do something else. But they're really eager to reach out and work with us. So we were fortunate to have that meeting and another partner potentially willing to pitch in and help out. And then lastly, in the board packet, there's a field trip request. And it's a request for a field trip for our 9th and 10th grade French students. There's 36 students in French 2, 3, and 4. And the French faculty would like to take them to a restaurant, Le Gamin Country in Hudson, New York, for a linguistic and culinary immersion experience on April 5th from 9:45 a.m. to 2:15 p.m. The only cost to the district would be the cost of transportation.
I think Sam Harp is on Zoom if there's any questions or any further information is needed.
So the question that I do have, because it says on the note, the students will pay the cost of dinner.
Yes.
And I have to ask this question, we had previously had a fund available to confidentially help students where that might be a burden to ensure that students can participate. Do we still have access to that, and is that an option for students to confidentially be able to attend events like this?
Don't see Mr. Harb as an
Yeah, I don't see him on.
attendee.
Okay.
But that has been my understanding also, that there's always been monies available. Melissa, is this something that's held in our budget, or is this something that lives?
It used to be called the Walker Fund, I don't know if we're still.
Yeah, I think it's part of the student activity general fund, and I believe that that's where they keep it.
Okay. But yes, I mean, obviously, we will make sure that anyone who can provide, you know, will get that ability to pay for this. We don't want anyone to be excluded due to lack of being able to pay. So we would certainly want to support that.
And the reason that this field trip comes up for our approval is because it's out of state.
Move to approve the request to approve the field trip as submitted by Mr. Herb.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And that concludes the superintendent's report this evening.
Was there something about preschool screening next week? Is there a date for that? I thought it was on the calendar.
Or yes.
23rd and 24th. I believe it's 23rd and 24th preschool screenings. Parents have been signing up.
So if anyone wants to make a plug for it, I guess you can make a plug here.
Sure. So again, we have preschool screenings coming up, and what were the dates again?
23rd and 24th.
All right, so the 23rd and 24th. If I'm a parent looking to sign up, who do I have to reach out to contact?
Michelle Louvier in my office. Or they can go on the website. There's a link to sign up for the screenings.
All right, so again, you can call Michelle Louvier over at Morris School to make an appointment, or you can sign up online at the district website. And again, that's next week, 20, or week of the 23rd and 24th, kindergarten, and preschool, or no, it's preschool, screening, sorry, kindergarten will be, later on in the springtime. Sorry, I was caught off guard there, I was, didn't have those dates here. All right, now that concludes this.
Okay, so we're at the point now where we have the public hearing for the school department budget, and this can take a number of forms. Over the years, we've come prepared with the entire budget book, which is now an online document. And, you know, what we usually do is have a presentation, an overview presentation, and then if there were any member of the public who wished any question to be asked, you know, we'll go into that. We also have in the budget document section here, you know, all of the presentations that were made for elementary, secondary, special services, technology, administration. So if there's any questions from the public on any of these areas, then we're prepared to address those. But other than that, we'll have the budget presentation for
All right, so I'm going to share my screen, so just give me a moment while I go into screen sharing mode here. All right. So this is, again, just a summary of the budget. We've had a number of presentations that you can find on our website. So this is kind of a quick recap. And so we really want to focus on overall kind of what's the story of the budget. I think every budget has a story, and I just wanted to have the opportunity again to share ours, where we've been and where we've come in the budget cycle. So the goals are, again, to talk about our approach to building the budget, the journey of our budget, and some of the factors that have impacted the FY 23 budget. So the first question is how do you build a budget? And so I just wanted to share a little bit of our process. So back in the fall, the budget process began. We actually shared with the school committee and the public our calendar, and then we get into the budget development process. And so we start with capital requests. So those are requests for building maintenance that has to be done, expenditures of durable goods that will last more than a few years, and that. And so we look at those kinds of requests at the beginning. We also look at what our staffing requests will be for the following year. We start to meet with our administrative team to talk to them about the process. And we start to have discussions between myself, Melissa Falkowski, our business manager and assistant superintendent, and also the school committee, particularly the finance subcommittee. Then as the year moves ahead, during the winter, we met with our principals and directors, and we had discrete meetings with each of those folks in our conference room to go line by line through their budgets, to discuss their needs. And this is the first time, maybe in some time, I don't know, maybe ever, we also went through and did what I would call a look back. And so we said to folks, you know, they came to us and said, oh, well, we always spend this on these things. And so viewing this as an opportunity for inquiry, I like to lean in and say, well, why? You know, what is it for? Why is it that amount? How do you know that that's the right amount? And in some cases, it was just a case of this is what we've always done. And so it was important to both Melissa and I to say, well, just because we always did it doesn't mean that this is the right way or the right amount. Let's take a look at what we've actually spent to see if we're parking the right amounts of money into these spots. And so we did a 5-year look back at all the lines to make sure that we were budgeting and projecting in a way that was real, and that was relevant, and that was giving folks adequate resources, but without, parking, numbers, amounts of money we didn't necessarily need. So if somebody said, well, we always put 10,000 here, but we only use 2, then we said, well, then let's only put 2, or maybe, 3, if you think it's gonna go up a little bit, but there's no need to tie up an additional, $7,000 or $8,000 that we don't usually spend. And so we wanted to be as clean as possible in this process. And so that was really important to Melissa and I, to remove any, I don't know what you would call padding or fat, that type of thing, but we wanted to just make sure that it was very clean and very tight. And so we went back and spent a lot of time doing that with folks, and I think that was a useful process. And also, I think, helped the principals go back to their plans and strategically align resources with the things that they want to do and see in their schools. From there, we moved forward and created a preliminary budget, and that was presented some months back. And that's kind of our best estimate of the true cost needed to continue to do business as what we would call level service, which means kind of doing the same thing, but just at this year's costs versus last year. And so that's kind of the operating principle that we used, and we built that initial budget. At that time, there's also still a lot of variables up in the air. There's still lots of costs that really aren't certain, negotiations that are still going on. And so at that point, again, we do our very best to build a realistic but rough estimate at that point. So one of the things that I think people may wonder is, well, what guides what you do? How do you decide, what goes in the budget and what doesn't? And I think that's a fair question. And so the first and foremost, I think, thing that's important to us as a core value was transparency. And so this is where we believe that it was important early and often to communicate the process. If you remember back, I was frequently asked Melissa to present updates on the budget process. I asked her to give an informational session one evening on federal programs and what those grants are, so that folks have an understanding when they hear about ESSER or some of these grants that are out there, what they are and what we can use those for. Everything that we generate is then posted on our website so that the public has access to review that as well. I'm under no illusion that everybody stops their role to tune into our school committee meetings. So we want people to also have the opportunity to read some of these things on their own time and take a little bit more time with it. So transparency has been one of our core guiding values here. The other thing I think that is really important to me, and happily to learn, Melissa as well, is that we don't take anything for granted. That we challenge assumptions, that really we require rationale and justification of actual needs for all expenditures. So when we see requests, we really, I think, we're deliberate in saying, well, describe to us the need. And if it's a new need, why is it new? If it's a need that no longer exists, then let's take it out. If it's an ongoing need, again, talk to us about what that is. We certainly don't want to shortchange schools, but at the same time, we don't want to use funds unnecessarily either. As I mentioned earlier, really accurate forecasting is another shared belief from Melissa and I. And so that's why we did that 5-year look back and want to really get out of the idea that we just park money in the same places year over year just because. So after we go through that process, we have our expenses, which we included in the gross budget, and then we take our overall expenses, we look at our expected revenues, and the difference between those are what we call our net operating budget. And so that's when we move forward in that preliminary budget. So again, we came before the school committee and community with a preliminary budget amount of about 13.5 million, which was a increase in the net budget of 5.4% from fiscal year 2022. And then once we have that kind of working number, we continue to refine that number as figures become more clear to us, as those estimates become more firm. Also, at that point, Melissa starts to look at what strategic moves that we can make to shift funds either to grants or even some accounting adjustments to move things to the right cost centers. Again, I think that that's more accurate, and we want to make sure that it's as easy as possible for people to kind of see where the money goes in the budget. It's not always clear, especially when lots of things tend to be bundled under large category codes. So again, we try to make those accounting cleanups as we move through as well. In going through that process, we were able to bring down the initial net budget to 13.4 million, which was a decrease, bringing it from the initial 5.6 down to 4.91%. And so that was a 0.55% decrease, so about half a point. We were able to also realize some gains this year by going through and cleaning up that forecasting. That exercise alone was able to return about $60,000 that would have been laying out there in the budget. So Melissa and I were pretty excited about that. Also, we talked about the net budget oftentimes, but the gross budget, when we look at the year-over-year increase from 22 to 23, we're looking at a 3.06 increase in that gross budget. So again, a increase that's about what the town manager had asked us to be at. So again, we felt pretty good about that. However, the budget doesn't stop in the gross budget phase, right? So
The gross budget, by the way, is the amount of money that we're going to spend on the schools. We offset it with revenues, but that's what we're going to be spending.
right.
Yeah.
And so we had to look at kind of where those changes came from, right? Because we went from a 5.6 to 4.91. So this has been shared earlier. So we had some reductions in textbooks, field trips, the other activities account. Our dues came in much under what we thought. And again, this is one of those things we talk about. The numbers initially, we look at some historic figures, and sometimes there's changes for various reasons, but the dues was one of those cases, right? So we thought we were going to spend around $4,000, and it comes in $1,500. So those are some of the magical things that happen to us, luckily. Sometimes it can go the other way as well, but so those were some of the pieces. As the numbers became more clear, we were able to adjust and revise. Student services, again, we just, as I talked about earlier, we did some cleanup and some moving around of things, but those stipends were able to be moved to grants, so that saved us a little bit of money. And we had another fortuitous event where out-of-district programs are looking to come in about 40,000 under the initial projections. So overall, that saved us $62,000. In technology, originally we were looking at $336,000. After going back through and prioritizing some of the spending, and also getting some of the pricing back in for some of these investments, it came in a little bit under what we anticipated. So again, we were able to see $14,000 in reduction there. Tuition reimbursement, this largely comes from the administration staff. We don't see that there's really going to be that, so we were able to reduce that line by 1,000 as well. So you can see that our reserve went from 342 up to 358, so that was an increase of 16,000. So that offset some of the other savings there. But we wanted to make sure that we had some money there for the previously discussed curriculum position. Some of that position is a stipend to do curriculum work. so that we can get our NEAS accreditation, and also a little bit of money for some of the folks who have contracts or getting raises that we have money to do that. So that's why we have to make sure we had adequate reserves there. And then I think any taxpayer is always interested in, where the money goes that we pay our taxes and how much of it actually gets to the kids. That's a question here oftentimes. And so if we were to look at our funding breakout by area, by schools, you can see that the bulk of our money is going to Element, HS, Morris, Student Services, salaries and benefits. So it's going to people and it's going to academic programs that are in school. So I think the answer to that question of how much gets to the kids is roughly, 80% or so, because a lot of that is being used up in what we call the instructional core, which is teaching and learning at the classroom level and interaction between teachers and kids. So what are the changes from last year? It gives you a look at some of our increases in costs. So we're seeing an increase at both schools. Student services is also projected to increase. Other school services is up 16%. So that's one that looks at first glance like a large increase. And some of that is the movement of a position into that account from another account. There's a support person that was moved to 504, was previously accounted for in another area. And also tutoring, which once was paid for out of the ESSER grant, being brought back into the budget so that later on we don't hit the fiscal cliff when those ESSER funds drop off. So try to slowly reintegrate costs that were offset by ESSER back into the budget over time. Technology, we've talked about this on a couple of occasions, and also Brandon McLeod gave his presentation. We have quite a bit of investment that has to take place in our technology department to upgrade our systems. Just last week, we had problems with connectivity. We have access points at the end of their life, and so we're just working on updating the hardware and software. We also were able to expand Chromebooks and to go to one-to-one. That also brings a few new wrinkles in terms of technology, and also an investment in enhancing our cybersecurity as well. So we do see some increases there in technology. And in the administration line, again, we see an increase there, largely due to the raises for our contracted folks, that curriculum stipend position that we talked about, which would be a new addition. So again, that's going to always tick up an area, particularly when we're talking about small amounts of money overall. I mean, I know it seems like large amounts of the school budget. These are small, but some of these increases, then the percentage is skewed pretty drastically. Also, taking on an MASC policy review that we've discussed with some of the subcommittees here from the school committee to update our policies to make sure they're aligned with Mass General Law and other state and federal laws. And then some small increases in dues and advertising. Operations and maintenance sees about a 5% increase. Again, largely due to salary obligations, increased costs due to inflation for supplies, and then also moving some of those pieces back from ESSER. So again, lots of dollars were spent over the last couple of years of COVID for HVAC and for buying PPE and cleaning supplies. And so we need to slowly bring those back into a regular operating budget. And then obviously some of them we can reduce and cut off and rather have the same need once COVID is in the rearview mirror. The biggest piece of the story, I think, is also in that third line, and it's the reduction in revenue that we're seeing from school choice. So we talked about our gross budget earlier being up 3%, but the overall budget being up 4.91%. And so our spending is up 3%, but the overall budget is impacted by the fact we have a reduction in revenue coming to us through school choice. Partly a result of COVID and some of the decisions that folks made around COVID, whether that was to not engage in school choice in that year, maybe stay home at homeschool. And so those were some of the factors that limited school choice. Also some internal decisions where we said, well, we'll take less school choice students to better serve the social and emotional health of the students that we have already. It would also potentially allow maybe some spacing, and so we made some decisions to also limit the number of kids we took during COVID as well. And then our obligations for benefits comes in basically flat, which is probably an eye-popping number because you're like, how is that possible? Especially if you read recently in the paper that another business manager said, well, it's going up 8%. That's true, but they're also going to have a benefit holiday where we'll get those savings back. So it's kind of, you pay it and then you don't pay it, so it ends up leveling out. It's kind of a goofy way to do it. I don't love that approach, to be honest, because I think it, also messes with people's paychecks. And if you're trying to run a household budget, it's kind of, a little bit of a, roller coaster ride. And again, if Melissa has any ability to talk to the folks on the benefits group, I mean, I think if we could try to smooth that out, if we need 8%, let's do, 4 years at 2%, that's a lot easier to swallow over time than, saying we're gonna have an 8% increase and all of a sudden we're back down to 0.
So, it's funny, because I thought I had heard, discussion about the 8% increase, and then when this came in level, I thought, well, where's that 8% increase?
Right.
Because that would have been enormous, and that would have blown us out of the water. But then it comes back to us because there's a month when there's not gonna be any benefit,
Yes, so it does level off, and we've been really keeping track of the invoices and who's on the invoice for the school department and should they be on the invoice every month. So we're on top of those as well. So we're able to keep that fairly level without, there's no surprises that there's a retiree on there that shouldn't be on there any longer or something like that. But it will level out, but with a premium holiday, which if I were on the board still, I think I would have voted differently.
We learned about that literally the day after we presented the preliminary budget, and almost fell out of my chair. Presented this one budget, now you tell me it's 8% increase, then we'll say, oh, wait, there is gonna be a premium holiday, so, at the end, it'll end up, a wash, but.
So are you treating it as a wash up there, Melissa, or are you doing as anticipated revenue like you do with some other things?
No, it is a wash. That's a true expenditure. There's no revenues offsetting that at all. That is the amount that we budgeted for 22. And that's the amount that I gave to the town for 23 as well. So did I misunderstand your question?
I'm not sure. So you're talking about 8% increase. Does that number up there have an 8% increase in it?
It does because of the premium holiday.
Okay. That's the part of it. lost.
It's 8% increase, but you only pay 11 for 12 months.
So there's 1
So
month,
that doesn't save you any money then, right?
it saves you 1 month of premiums on both the town's percentage and the employee's percentage. So instead of paying for 12 months, you're paying for 11 months, both
Okay.
town and employee.
Next year, when there's no premium holiday, that number will be up 8% and our budget will be badly broken.
Okay. That will hurt. Okay.
Yeah, at some point, unless they keep having holidays. We're gonna have to pay,
Yeah, or they can, again, borrow against their fund balance, and pay it off that way too. They have a pretty healthy amount of money in reserve too, so.
In an era of 7% inflation,
Well,
that could be a problem.
Great.
And I do know that the reason that this raise in premiums came up this year was because the claims are higher than the premiums collected, and that's always a red flag when that happens. But the policy of that group is to keep a large number in reserve, and they're within their bounds. I don't know if they used any to offset the increase. I don't believe they did.
Thank you. All right, so in summary, for fiscal year 23, we're looking at a budget that's a level service plan. Again, we used zero-based budgeting practices. It's not a zero-based budget per se, but we did incorporate the idea that we want to build forward and take a look at and justify and rationalize the spending. That's not just a roll forward type budget. It assumes that we retain 3 sections of elementary at Morris, for grades K through 5, 2 sections of pre-K at Morris as well. It accounts for the changes in personnel costs, including placeholders for contractual obligations and retirements, provides capacity to continue all current initiatives and instructional programs, and also has a little bit of money built in for a stipend for a part-time curriculum director to, again, help with the alignment for the ask. Some of the factors that are impacting the budget, we've talked about these on many of our presentations, but one is there's been a historical effort not to exceed 3%. And so looking back, that's been roughly a decent benchmark, but we do see that every once in a while there have been times where it did exceed 3% to course correct or adjust for some unforeseen circumstance. So that was something that we did see in the historical look backs. It also is impacted by trying to create a level service budget through that zero-based approach. Maintaining a reserve for unexpected costs such as outplacements. One of the things that we're seeing is some of our expenditures were artificially not made during COVID, and so they're coming back into the budget now that kids are back in school and school is ramping back up to something more akin to normal. And so again, one of those examples would be something like field trips. We also have to make investments to ensure that we have reliable technology to support teaching and learning. And we need that curriculum work to address those NIASC findings so that we can work toward our accreditation. And we've been impacted by the choices made last year around choice students, because that does limit revenue in the year that trails it. And so we're still kind of, living now the impacts of that.
And the decline in choice revenue was about 0.5% approximately.
The factors further impacting the budget are ongoing negotiations with our teachers and custodians. As Bob just mentioned, also that we're living in a 7% inflationary period, which is a 40-year high. And we also only have 2 retirements projected at this time. And so some years you're able to realize the savings of some folks leaving at a higher salary and replacing them with maybe people coming in at lower salaries, or that's not even always given. But this year, we only have 2 retirements projected. So again, as I mentioned earlier, if you'd like to learn more, you can follow the link to our website. It'll bring you a direct link to our website area where the budget lives, and you can see all the budget documents that have been created all year. We've done multiple presentations to this school committee, to the subcommittees, particularly finance of this board, and also the town's finance committee. And so again, we've tried to keep everyone involved throughout this process. We tried to offer budget updates even before budget developments began, and try to educate folks all the way throughout the process. But again, if you want to go take a closer look, all those documents are housed online for you to review.
Okay. Any questions from the public?
Hi, Mary Beth Mitz, 20 Dunmore Court, Lenox. I just have a question about your Unit A and your custodial negotiations. Have those been closed yet? You haven't closed those.
And it's rare during the year that they come up, that we have our budget always has to be done before we're done. I mean, I suppose, you know, might be some rare year when it's done, but it hasn't been in my experience.
Well, just in looking at the different priorities that you have, and knowing that Lenox is fairly regionally competitive with regard to teacher salaries, and that you're trying to, you know, do a zero-based budgeting approach, and knowing that you have a 7% inflation rate ahead of you. I hope that you're looking at your negotiations and looking at the increases and the reserve amounts that you have on hand, and keeping all that information in play as you try to reach the appropriate numbers moving into the next fiscal year. I just wanted to ask that you keep that in mind.
And Mary Beth, as you know, because you sat in this chair, this side of this, I think that what has been done is really, really thoroughly vetted, and I think Dr. Gosselin has articulated some very specific goals for the district, as well as some very specific recouping of or resetting or realigning goals to bring our district forward after, you know, collective trauma that we've all been through in the last couple of years. And when, as you know, also having been through that with the teacher negotiation, you know, the faculty and staff negotiations, it's just really important that we go through that process in a way to do what's best and have a bargaining, a collaborative process that is mindful and respectful of the significant amount of work that we ask all of our faculty and staff to do, and especially in the last 2 years where we've asked for complete retooling of how we deliver education. So thank you for that. And I think what we've had is a collective collaborative way between the select board and the school committee in being aware of taxpayer dollars, but at the same time, we have to be kind of pull back just from that place where one part is sort of dictating the other, as you know, because of course it's just important that we, sometimes there's this comparison, well, every other department is doing this, and yet we don't treat every department the same because every department has different work to do. In the end, we're dealing with dollars that are brought to us from our taxpayer base and from a lot of different sources, because we have the benefit of the tourism industry and other supplemental income that is not specifically from Cherry Street and real estate tax dollars. So I thank you for that. And I think, you're always working on these solutions in a collaborative way, and I appreciate that collegiality. And I also just always want to be sure that when we go into our bargaining stance, that we recognize that we're focusing on that collaborative based process. I think it's really important. People sometimes say, oh, we've got it all figured out ahead of time. That would defeat the whole purpose of moving forward with collaborative based bargaining. I know you've done it, so.
I appreciate that, but I also just want to point out that doing a look back on the town's budgets as well over the last 2 or 3 years with regard to COVID, we took a serious look at where we were in all of our departments and asked a number of departments to make some serious cutbacks to help with COVID, to help with the 0 increase in the tax rate that we put on the town 2 years ago, and made serious cutbacks in our staff at the library, at the community center, put on hold hiring in DPW and the police and fire departments. And we really took a huge bite at the apple with regard to that. And, it was necessary, it was difficult. And we're just asking that as the school department, you take a look at that as well moving forward. And that, realizing that all of us want to remain competitive regionally in the types of salaries that we offer and the benefits that we offer, but that we can all make sacrifices in order to move our town forward.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Any comment from the school committee?
Mary Beth, was that comment, select board comment, or was that just? public
That was a
comment?
personal comment.
Okay, thank you.
I think I just wanna say, and I wasn't present for the 28th, so I think there's a lot of commentary that probably happened that night, and I couldn't even log in, so that was too bad, but I wanna say too, that I think that the targeted areas of technology and support around, from feedback from our NEASC assessment, and also I think some of our own self-evaluations around curriculum, around social emotional support, that, you know, it isn't something that just Lenox is discussing, it's a national crisis that's being brought forward, and how do we really support students in a way that help them to recoup from what's happened and move forward in a productive way. And I think we've focused at several other presentations. Dr. Gosselin has also talked about supporting our community, not just our individual students, but the communities in which they also live and engage. So I feel like it's hard because we say it should be this or it should be that. I think the numbers have really been tailored to where there are increases to really focus on those very specific needs. And when it comes to technology during COVID, there's been a lot of like, okay, we've got to go back and kind of make sure we have things and, you know, get support out to students. And then there was an opportunity to evaluate that and learn what was really lacking in our technology. And I've heard in other meetings and in subcommittees, a lot of conversation about needing to bring the technology forward in a way that supports students, families, faculty, both in learning in person and in supporting that learning outside of in person, whether it's the homework, home to school conversation, equitable access to technology conversation, which has been happening. And I personally feel that this budget is where there is a little bit of growth. It's targeted very specifically to items that I think our school department sorely needs. And sometimes even we find with other districts, and we're considered well regarded in a lot of ways, but there are some holes, and I think we've been under Dr. Gosselin's leadership trying to evaluate what those are and how we can make this curriculum and this our educational offering equitable for everybody and actually something that we can bring forward. So I personally feel that there's a lot of effort and energy around making the programming and the costs appropriate for what we need.
Yeah, and I looked at budget increases from 2015 to now. I actually looked at 2008 to now, but when we met with the finance committee, they suggested that was a long span. There were some years in there with very low percentage increases because of the economy. So I went back and kind of redid a look at from 2015 to 2023. And our average gross budget went up about 3.5%. This year was 3.06%. And that's not what we asked the town to do, because we have offsets from school choice and other things. But we know that we did some budgeting last year. We were told to keep it to 3%. So we cut 170,000 approximately. And some of that we moved to ESSER, some we just didn't run programs like field trips and so on. So it's coming to roost this year. Some of those things that are coming back in the budget. So our 4.91% increase on, first off, gross budget, which is what we spend, is only at 3.06. But what we asked the town for is the 4.91, the net budget. And that is up more than we'd like, but there are, decrease in school choice was 0.5%, and probably bringing the stuff back from ESSER that was just not included was probably another
0.9%.
0.9%. I was gonna say 0.75%, but 0.9%. So that's 1.4% of our increase is right there, which would bring us back to 3.5. The finance committee also asked us at our meeting whether we felt that we felt we should have a higher placeholder. And I didn't know what that placeholder potentially could be, but I certainly do feel that it's hard. It's always going to be hard to stay at 3%. We've done it a number of years, and there are a number of years we haven't. Probably about half the years we've been around 3, and about half the years we haven't. But it's hard to maintain that given the fact that we're a very labor intensive operation. And so, well, I didn't have a number to suggest to the finance committee the other night, or the selectmen. 3.5 would seem to me to be at least a decent starting point, maybe even higher, but based on an 8-year average of 3.5, that would be, we might not always hit that, as we haven't always in recent years, but that seems to me to be perhaps a more realistic placeholder for the schools in the future. People may argue with that, but that's what I have to say. And I just want to say that one of us will have to read the proposed motion at some point tonight, so I hope that somebody has it up. Who
Yeah.
read it through, because it's a lengthy motion with a lot of numbers in it, so. But any
It
other
seems like you were inviting conversation and comment before. we
comment
move to that.
before we move?
I know sometimes we do it the other way, but it seems like that's what you're inviting.
Well, I just want to make one comment, picking up both on what you just said and Mary Beth's comment, which I think is helpful, which is that when you just do the same thing that you did last year and your costs go up, then yes, you're going to have the cost pressure. I think, we had a good conversation at the last meeting about what was maybe missing in this budget process with respect to thinking beyond just how do we do the same thing we did last year. But certainly my sense is that goes for essentially the entire period that, that you're looking at this, probably going back to whenever we switched to the 8-period schedule. And so maybe at some point, it will prove that you can't run a great school with 3% increases. But I certainly don't think we should come to that conclusion before we've tried. And I don't think we can really say that we've tried, given the way that budgeting has been happening. We're also, at the rate we're going, by next year, we're going to have to get used to talking in terms of real versus nominal budget increases. And we've all just gotten used to the fact that inflation is 1.5% to 2%. And so what we mean in our head by 3% is cost of living +1. Whether it should be higher than cost of living or not, I think is a fair question, especially given the tax base. But we will have to translate next year. Cost of living +1 might be very different. But that's what we should be asking is what is it that's driving our budget up over time faster than cost of living? And conversely, what are the kinds of things we can do to be smarter about how we run the schools over time? So, I think as Mark presented, I think it's right that based on things done last year. Last year's budget maybe wasn't a very good one. This year's budget is. But I guess the two requests I would have for next year are, one, that we start the process an awful lot sooner. And think bigger picture, and two, that we stop using the term zero-based budgeting when we are not doing zero-based budgeting. Zero-based budgeting means actually sitting down, thinking about what the educational experience we want to provide is, and then figuring out what it would cost to provide it. It doesn't mean sitting down, writing down all the things you did last year and seeing how much it will cost to do them again. So, this is not a process that we in theory need to go through every year. It's a difficult one, but I think the time has come. And so it is a great time in Mark's tenure also to do it. So I hope we'll be having a different conversation at this time next year.
Any other comments? Someone like to make a motion on our budget? This would be the motion to approve our FY23 budget.
I'd like to make a motion to approve, and I don't know, I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, if we have part 1, part 2, and part 3, if we, unless you feel like it needs to all be made as part of one, and that's always the struggle.
It's all really
To,
one thing.
okay,
Yeah.
to approve a gross operating budget in the amount of $13,418,843 for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2022 and ending on June 30th, 2023. Part 2, to approve the application of $1,783,259 in revenue toward the reduction of the fiscal year 2023 gross budget from the following sources. One, school choice receipts of $1,535,000. Two, non-choice receipts of $125,000. Three, theater receipts of $7,500. Four, preschool receipts of $30,000. Five, special education circuit breaker receipts of $51,259. Six, athletic receipts of $22,000. Seven, building use receipts of $6,500. Eight, professional development receipts of $6,000. Part three, to see if the town of Lenox will vote to raise and appropriate the net sum of $11,635,584 for the school department's fiscal year 2023 operating budget.
Is there a second?
Go ahead. Christine.
Second.
Second. Is there any discussion, any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor, signify by raising your hand.
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you all. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't have any unfinished business. New business, I thank you though for the information at the International Fair. I inadvertently missed the National Honor Society stuff last week.
Can I make a correction?
Yes,
The
yes,
dates are the 22nd, 23rd, not the 23rd, and 24th.
so
For
the
this.
preschool screening is the 22nd and 23rd.
I shared it on our social media, and I was reminded by that by Michelle, so we're good.
I was gonna bring that up and then totally forgot. So subcommittees that may have met in the last couple of weeks since we last met.
The governance and leadership committee met, but it was an abbreviated meeting. Yeah, any major updates for the committee.
Yeah, just that we're moving forward with the
Policy review.
policy review. Human resources. We've been having ongoing meetings. Teaching, learning, and culture.
We met just last week, and so we're meeting approximately once a month. And discussed some generally about what's happening with the changes as of today of no longer mandated mask policies and how that's conversations that were happening, the open school forum last week to help answer questions, and then the ways in which that's currently being rolled out and implemented. Today is the first day, so we're assuming that hopefully that things are going well. And then we talked about moving forward with our 3-year plan for diversity, equity, inclusion training and evaluation. Our process of talking to, vetting different consultancy organizations that can help us with that work. And going through the next steps for that, potentially invite them for presentation or proposal.
Good, I have a question about that, or are we gonna have a discussion of the full committee at some point about, I hadn't realized there was a 3-year plan in the works, but what the 3-year plan is, what it costs, what the purpose is, and so forth.
I assume so, yeah. I mean, we're gonna make a proposal to go forward with trainings, and I would think so, yeah. Some of it has to do with professional development training. Some of it has to do with training within within the school itself, and then others with training for us and other coordinated efforts. I think what we're looking to do is engage somebody around assisting us with that training. I think self-training isn't really gonna get us what we're looking
And
for.
what are we training on?
I'm sorry,
What is the training? What are people learning in the training?
about diversity, equity, about concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I mean, that's our general conversation about it, but I think that the nuts and bolts of what we're exactly learning, I think we've been talking to consultants about. In my experience with a lot of training, some of it's about understanding history, understanding our own role in that, understanding government policies, how that impacts people, communities that are impacted more than others. How do we develop understanding and empathy for one another? How do we engage in communication in a way that's respectful and values variety of points of view? I mean, I think some of it would include also looking at our curriculum to find out whether our curriculum also shares those values of engaging in points of view, conversation, history,
Okay. No.
interactions, historical biases that sometimes run into problems, how do we understand those and maybe think about things differently, because we maybe always have thought about a situation in our own way, I guess. I don't know, that's a little summary way of thinking about it, but those are the kinds of things I'm looking for. when
So
I'm
we are
looking at
getting
it.
into, we are getting into setting curriculum, which from what I understood was a no-no for our group, but do you find, or do you expect
Wait,
that
let me just back up.
Yeah.
Sorry, a no-no for what? I don't understand what you mean.
the school committee doesn't set or change curriculum, if I'm not mistaken?
Oh, I would not, I was not suggesting, I think when we, for example, if you were to do an equity review or an equity audit of a library, you might look and say, we have to decide what books we're gonna buy, right? Decide what do we have, what do we not have. Within the school, we've decided what are we teaching, what are we not teaching. There's a state evaluation, so right now DESE actually has a number of different initiatives. Is our school in compliance with what DESE is? And there was a pretty major reevaluation of the humanities curriculum in 2018. My understanding, even when I was running for office, that some of our curriculum wasn't in alignment with what DESE is saying we should be teaching relative to social studies curriculum. So it would be some of those things in alignment with what DESE is doing. There's some new curriculum initiatives being rolled out through DESE that we have to be in alignment with as well. So as far as our committee and school committee, we don't vote on our set curriculum, but DESE does, and our school leaders do. Because there's lots of different ways to teach, right? So teachers gonna choose some books to learn reading, we have to choose which books it's gonna be, right? We don't do that here. But when we learn and think about the lenses in which we choose these things, we're both doing it at a DESE level and within our own schools is how do we apply that? So does that answer your question?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, I guess my concern, just in hearing the process you were describing it, is that it sounded like it potentially envisions hiring a consultant to, in a sense, tell us what we need, which is, I'm oversimplifying, but I am, regardless of the topic, very wary of hiring consultants to tell us what we need, as opposed to hiring a consultant to solve a specific problem after we have identified it and said it's a priority. So I guess my ask would be that we come back and as a committee discuss which of these, you mentioned a huge list of things that could potentially be issues. I'd love for us to discuss as a committee which of those we see as priorities and think are should be in focus, and especially if we're investing money in them. And then where we identify them, if we feel like we might need a consultant to help address that, I think would be great. But I'd at least be very wary of hiring a consultant at the sort of tell us what we need to know stage.
Well, I mean, like anything, we're learning. I mean, I don't know about you, I'm not prepared, I'm not prepared to step in and say, okay, I know everything that needs to happen for us to meet our goals. Our strategic plan talked about diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. It was we all voted on it, it was very specifically laid out in there. And there was some smaller, like under that umbrella to do items such as discourse and dialogue. There were other items about reviewing curriculum. There were items about, hearing from lots. I mean, I don't have it memorized, but if you recall, there was a whole component that you and I actually worked on that talked about issues of inclusion and equity within our school districts. So on the one hand, consultants help us to engage with each other, to analyze and think about ways in which we can learn from each other. And that can happen in a school committee retreat. It can also happen when we choose what professional development to do, what type of teaching and learning we need to engage in with our faculty, what type of teaching and learning we need to do with our support staff, and how are we engaging with students. And if we don't open up and actually get some help in learning in that way, I mean, you're right, and we have to make decisions about who we engage with or not, but some of it we also entrust our superintendent to know, okay, professionally, I've now been in this district for not yet a year, but rolling out to that, these are the items that I think I'd like to see our leaders and our faculty members engage in. We would typically hire someone to help do that. So I think what we want to do, instead of just spot checking and sort of doing a little bit of a whack-a-mole, oh, we're going to learn about this initiative, we're trying to have something planful that really brings our district to a place that we're in line with, quite frankly, what a lot of other districts have been doing for a while. So I'm not prepared at this point to tell you it's gonna be X, Y, and Z. We generally have been talking about engaging somebody, thinking forward planfully about some of the questions around diversity, equity, inclusion, around how we're providing academic supports, these were all things that came out of our survey, our strategic plan, how are we seeing all learners, how are we opening up other pathways, there's a lot of different things I think that come into that. We spent all that time in a strategic plan and we ended up with some specific initiatives. So how we bring those forward, I think, is through having a multi-year plan rather than just, okay, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. It seems for a while now, we've been doing sort of what sometimes we refer to as a little bit of a whack-a-mole. We're gonna have a training on this, we're gonna have a training on that. How do we align them? And quite a bit of this is in DESI's recommendations. So these are things that we're doing in alignment with what we're actually required to do.
This is on me then. It is difficult for me to connect what you are saying to actual problems I'm aware of in the district or things that, for instance, showed up in the strategic planning survey. So, and if everyone else is clear on it, that's fine. My suggestion would be, especially now that we're through the budget process, it might be very helpful to have a presentation at our next meeting that it'd be great to revisit the strategic plan findings and say, here are the actual things we're talking about. Here's what this would look like in practice. And here's why we believe this should really be. It sounds like in essence, the top priority. This is the thing that the TLC is working on. And I think that would be a good conversation.
Well,
I don't know that, I'm sorry.
in the 2 nights that we had or 2 afternoons or whenever we did our retreat, I guess one day and one evening. This was always on the agenda and never got to because we.
Yeah.
And the thought was that perhaps sometime in the fall or winter, we would have another meeting with the school committee just with this as the only topic. And we haven't really been ready for that yet. We may be getting closer to that.
I'd just like to do that sooner. I don't think we should be ready. The point of the conversation should be for everybody to have a discussion about how they feel about it and what the priorities are. And I guess that's why I'm raising it right now, is when I start hearing 3-year plan, hire a consultant. That sounds a lot further down the road than we were when we agreed we should have a discussion about it as a committee.
Well, we can work to come up with an evening, aside from the regular scheduled meetings we have, maybe add another meeting.
And some of the ways, sometimes when you're talking about that, right, we did our own strategic planning, and I think we came up with a lot of really good ideas. There were a lot of very thoughtful people from all sectors on that process, and we had the survey, but we didn't, as we had done in the past, when you were on the school committee, I think maybe not even here, we hired a consultant to assist us with the strategic plan, which helped us to refine and choose goals and articulate them in a way. And there was a lot of work and a lot of money put toward that. Some districts are choosing, Pittsfield's engaging one right now, I think Williamstown is starting one, choosing to do an equity audit to get, and when they talk about equity audit, what they're doing is looking at what have they been doing and how does it align with current practices, DESI's recommendations about how we're, and some of them are required, some are recommendations, some are requirements of things that we need to do, and how do you incorporate various aspects. So what are some of the things you've been doing that have been working? What are some of the things that you're doing?
Can you just give an example of something concrete from the, what is something concrete that an equity audit would identify in Lenox?
An equity audit might identify whether or not children of color are disciplined more greatly than other children, might identify areas in your curriculum that either don't recognize various aspects of our history or recognize various characters or people or stories that actually exist within the world. I'm not sure. I'm not an expert in this, so I'm trying. We're talking to people to say, what would it look like if we did a 3-year plan? Our reason for doing that is to spread it out and to do more planful work around professional development, around setting goals, around leadership, around curriculum, et cetera. And so rather than doing it ourselves, which I don't think we would ever expect that we would do these things ourselves, we're talking to different groups to see how they would propose that we go forward. And are thinking about it being 3-year plan is not to try to do everything in a week because systems change, culture change, curriculum change happens over time and planfully. And also in accordance with things that are coming from Massachusetts legislation that we may have to incorporate into it. So when you're saying, give me something concrete, what I was starting to say is that an equity audit is sometimes the first thing that people do. And then they give you a list of recommendations. And that comes more from the outside. We were looking to try to do this kind of in the way you're saying, figuring out what's the best way to move forward from the inside, rather than having somebody come and tell us. We have an EASC evaluation that gives us a lot of information of places where we need to do some work. We have some DESI changes that I think we already know we need to align. And then we have some leadership training that I think our new superintendent wants to see happen as he's now about to know how our district works better. I think that there are some areas that have been in the newspaper of areas in which children have struggled, in which there's been community desire to see us, do some work. I think that's there. But we have to see how much that really tells us of how we need to make the changes. So there's no secret happening. It's more like this is in our strategic plan. How are we implementing that? How are we going forward? And we're talking to some of the experts out there to help us figure that out. So the question is whether you said at our next meeting, whether we'd be ready to have that conversation at our next meeting. Maybe we can refine that and report that back to you about when we could have that conversation. And our next meeting is around the second Wednesday of April.
Do we have any plans to schedule a separate meeting just for that conversation? Like you said, it had kind of been pushed to the side. I think I would feel more comfortable and at ease kind of just having a conversation, a casual conversation as a group about that topic. And I think we should make that a point to schedule that.
Yeah, well, we, here we are on 14th. We have our next meeting, I believe, is April 11th. Correct? Oh, I have the wrong date.
Sounds plausible.
It might be. It might be. So
April
we,
11th.
Yes.
yeah, so we could schedule something in between. We've got a month before our next meeting. We can schedule something in 2 weeks, perhaps, to,
You're saying about adding a meeting though?
yeah.
From my involvement with the TLC so far, the Teaching Learning Committee, we're trying to fulfill a goal in the strategic plan. And we're soliciting some ideas and proposals from people. Until we get those proposals, I have no idea really what we're trying to do. I'm just too unfamiliar with the topic. It might be more productive to do it after we get some feedback from these people who send tenders out to.
Could you circulate the tenders to the committee so we have a sense of what you're looking for and who you're talking with?
I don't see why not, although it may be more beneficial to come in subcommittee. Because at some point we're going to discuss them.
Yeah,
In subcommittee.
we're prepared to ask them to come talk to us, yeah.
I mean, we're still in the very preliminary reach out phase to see who's available, who's out there in the field,
Yeah, what they do, what their expertise
what kind of
are.
qualifications you have.
Yeah.
And then we won't schedule something between now and April 11th. We'll wait to see what comes from the next meeting.
I mean, in terms of retreats and stuff, like I said, what we've all said here is that we had plans to reschedule retreats. You're in aid negotiations and budget and a lot of other things. So
Right.
we can look at when the calendar fits for everybody to meet again.
Yeah, we talked about that at the last TLC, right?
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Yeah, we would incorporate that into a retreat, yeah.
Okay. So the finance subcommittee met, we talked about the budget that we're talking about here, comparisons to budgets over the last 16 years. Some of the concerns we had were raised here tonight relative to this budget about revenue and the false revenue streams as a result of moving ESSER money, moving stuff into ESSER. Reviewed 10-year staffing report, which essentially shows that we're relatively flat with the exception of 2013-14, when that must have been when the 8 period day schedule is incorporated, because that's some personnel added then, and then some 2021 COVID, slight uptick in paraprofessionals hired to deal with some of the COVID needs. And that's pretty much what we talked about in the finance subcommittee. And the school building committee, we are faced with needing to submit this SOI, the statement of interest, I've mentioned this before, which will require the committee to vote probably at our April 11th meeting for ready, or perhaps may have a meeting set very specifically for the purpose of voting to submit. Because part of the form, we have to kind of put the scope in of what it is we're looking to do, and we're not ready to do that yet. But the submission is April 29th. We are at the process right now of soliciting engineering bids for an engineering study. Those bids will come in on March 25th. The committee's going to have, the school building is going to have a meeting on March 25th to either select a vendor or ask some vendors to come in on Monday, the 28th, to interview them with a very tight timetable of having their work done by April 22nd, which then gives a week for the writing team to put a document together. Now, the writing team so far has been writing, but there'll be a lot that you have to have an engineering report for the type of stuff we're asking for. You're required to submit an engineering report, so that's where we are. So we're not going to meet again until the 25th when we review the bids that come in. We're anticipating three to five bids, I think. If people submit, but there's such a tight timetable that it may be too tight a timetable for them to do the work. And in worst case scenario, the work we're doing to prepare an SOI for this year, might be really for next year.
We did have one respond and is not willing to attend the informational meeting in tour tomorrow because of the timeline.
Yeah, and that we may find that, so it may be that we have to resolicit, depending on what happens, might have to resolicit and have a broader timeline, in which case we can't meet the April 29th deadline. We've been doing some initial writing since the very end of January. But the window opens and then it closes. Yeah. So, that said.
Move to adjourn.
Move to adjourn. So moved. Seconded.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And celebrate my 74th birthday.